Where?
Everywhere, man.
All right, guys, you ready to get going? Are we good on everything?
Latency.
We're doing it on live stream, so the other guys can see it.
The most dressed up I ever get, by the way.
The most dressed up I ever. Actually, that's actually the one panel we were on. I was pretty dressed up.
Yeah, I think we're like more sneakers. I thought, you know, going by like my dad's old thing, like always, if you're not sure, overdress a little bit.
I just go by whatever I have.
Most cleanest.
Most cleanest, great.
The sniff test.
Still waiting on the live feed here.
Okay. So where are we being broadcast to?
Live stream.
Live stream to which offices?
Hey guys, we're just setting up live stream. So if you guys can mute your phones, by the way, also as inside, that'd be good. So we have, let's see, New York, Chicago, LA, where else? Dallas, San Francisco,
Chicago.
Did I say Chicago? Detroit, Atlanta.
Global? Any global?
No. We could throw someone in.
Throw someone in, give me that quick head pay or something.
Yeah. It's just easier using live stream or like Ustream.
That's 10 times good. Okay, you're live.
We're good? All right. All right, guys, anyone on the phone, if you guys have questions along the way or any issues, go ahead and just chat on live stream. Lori is manning it, so she's happy to do it, right? Yeah, super excited. All right, let's get going. So for those of you guys that are just joining the company, we have a monthly speaker session, and Jim has been kind enough to join us for this session. We've had some great folks, so a lot of people that you know, Steve Case, we have the founder of YouTube, founders of Something Social, and the whole thing is, you know, let's just make sure that we can learn as much as possible from people who have achieved a lot of great things. Jim has done a lot. In fact, Jim, you were one of the first people I had a meeting with when we started this company back at AOL. So anyway, I'll let Jim go ahead and introduce himself. And as you guys know who have been here, this is pretty informal, so feel free to ask questions along the way. And Jim, it's pretty laid back, so go ahead and
Cool.
be relaxed, no pressure.
All right, well, that's right. So I'm Jim Bankoff, and I have been involved in online media for just about my whole career. Like, I got out of school, I did some offline media, worked for CNN for a little bit and PBS, but then I went to business school and I joined AOL during business school. And then I joined full-time after, so it was from '96. And you know, for better or worse, I've always been involved in the online content part of the business. Content and kind of content-based applications and community-based applications. So while at AOL, I did a lot of different things, but ultimately I never shipped discs. But other than that, I was involved in the services end, and like thankfully that was the case. It wasn't like always a good thing to be the kind of content and services guy at a subscription-based ISP company, and you know, if there was $1 to invest, I would be raising my hand saying like, this stuff's the future, you should invest in this. But you know, the cash cow was on the ISP side, and usually that 99.5 cents on that dollar went to to ship a disk or to add some modems, and it was, you know, for a long time it was the right business decision until it was the wrong business decision. But for me, it was like a great learning opportunity. I managed all the content brands, all the kind of community brands, including AIM and ICQ and MapQuest, MoviePhone, the AOL portal, and launched a bunch of new brands, including TMZ and some other ones. And then when AOL kind of pulled in, I'm talking a lot in AOL speak because I know there's some AOL alums and friends of alums in this audience, so I could shorthand it. But when we decided to pull down the wall, I was tasked with kind of figuring out a way to make AOL's content and services relevant and as a portal. Tough assignment. You know, we had outdated technology, Rain Man, FDO screens, and we had a brand that was kind of irrelevant in the media and frankly in the internet landscape. And so we had to do what we could do, and as you know, they're still trying to do it. But part of how I thought we should do it was by embracing professional blogging. And so I acquired a company ran by Jason Kalkanis and Brian Alvey called Weblogs Inc. That included a site called Engadget, and more importantly for us included a platform, a blogging platform called Blogsmith. And it enabled us to kind of really quickly grow new brands, whether it was Engadget or TMZ was based off of that. Fast forward until the recent Huffington Post acquisition, Blogsmith, the platform, was AOL's whole publishing platform pretty much, and community management system. I bring that up because what I do today, run a company called SB Nation, a sports blogging company, recently announced that we're going to get into technology writing as well. We, not so ironically, brought in the head writers from Engadget, formerly of Engadget, to lead that effort for us. But the principle is really the same. Fast forward with better technology and kind of better editorial talent, but we're kind of hoping to kind of push forward on the kind of digital publishing landscape. And really the formula at the high level is simple. It's like cutting edge publishing and community and analytics technology combined with the best possible editorial product to focus on passionate audiences, and you know, that's what we're trying to create. So it's kind of an old school model in a sense, because it's a media company, but applying kind of new school craft and technology to get the job done. So that's my long-winded intro.
Does anyone have any questions on his background? You can pick it whatever you want.
I did some other things too along the way. I worked at an investment firm for a couple of years in between, but that's not really too interesting.
So can you tell us a little bit about how you know, you decided to found the company and you know, where you've gone from beginning to end? I mean, it's been a pretty interesting story. You guys are growing pretty fast.
Yeah, and you know what? I often get credit for founding the company because I was around pretty early and I brought in the original investment and everything. But I cannot tell a lie, I did not start the company. It was founded by a guy who was a big Oakland A's fan. And he created the biggest Oakland A's blog, and he got interviews with guys like Billy Beane and the owner of the team, and kind of took off, and he became a Pied Piper of sorts for other kind of former journalists or just hobbyists who like were really passionate fans about their team. And their whole aspiration, which is part of our culture today, is that, you know, they wanted to empower people, fans, to share their passion for their teams. I got involved, you know, kind of not that far into the company. Had been around for a couple of years, but it was more like a hobby where they caught the tiger by the tail. And some of the founders kind of brought me on because they knew about my background, joined the board. When I joined the board, I actually made a small angel investment. It's something rare. I don't have like enough money to be making too many angel investments, but I really believed in this one. Of course, they blew through my money within like a matter of you know, a few weeks, and having wanting to like ultimately get some kind of return on that investment, I got more involved in the company. I helped them. We basically set on a path to either sell really early on or raise money. And in our case, we decided to raise money. We got some venture capital investment about close to 3 years ago now. And subsequent to that, we did a couple other rounds of investment and have been growing it. You know, it's a great team. I mean, just to maybe back up a little bit on, you know, kind of a little bit philosophically, like what our beliefs are. Like, first is, and I think, you know, how I can maybe be helpful to ClearSpring in this talk is just to kind of give the perspective of a publisher and, you know, answer questions along those lines. I know you deal with publishers all day long, and you know, I'm here in the neighborhood, and you know, you can always feel free to ask me questions about stuff too. But you know, the way I see things going, having, you know, trying to take one of my weaknesses, which is I think I'm the oldest one in this room, and turn it into a strength. I can maybe give a little bit of a history, and like, so, you know, particularly from the AOL perspective. So, you know, I got involved in digital media. There was AOL. My first job was actually working for this division called the AOL Greenhouse, and it was our job to go out and finance, like a VC, content companies or online services companies, because there weren't enough. AOL had this problem. It's like, we're selling this access bundle, but you get online and there's nothing to do. Like, imagine like having that problem right now. Maybe some jaded people say there's still nothing to do online, but the truth is, you know, there are billions of websites and apps, and at that time there were like dozens. And so, there wasn't even a website. This is before the web. So we would hand out money, and some of them actually did pretty well. To companies like Motley Fool, we helped start Motley Fool, iVillage, Net Noir, a bunch of other things. Passed on some great deals too, like Amazon, but we don't like to. Steve probably doesn't like to talk about those as much. But imagine a time where AOL had to finance companies to start up a media-based website because there weren't enough. And then the dot-com boom came along, and we didn't have to be in that business anymore. In fact, they shut down the greenhouse, and I had to scramble, as a young guy to find another job within the company. But for the industry, the next issue was, all right, there are now a lot of websites, and consumers need a way to make sense of them. So someone had an idea, let's build a directory of all these websites. And along came DMOZ and Yahoo. And okay, now we have a nice kind of Dewey Decimal System to categorize all of these websites. And quickly, obviously, what happened was that couldn't scale anymore. And and I'm doing this by way of kind of showing the fragmentation going on, from a historical perspective. So the directory couldn't scale, so along comes search. And so Yahoo wins directory, Google wins search. And then we all know the Google story. And then what's the next thing comes along is okay, discovery gets lost from all the directed behavior in search. And along comes social, the rise of Facebook, and all this is now accelerating at a greater and greater pace. But you can kind of see the trends of content discovery. First, the literal programming of a website on home pages like AOL and Yahoo, then search with that directed behavior, and then social with friends, and then increasingly across multiple devices. And for us as a publisher, what all that fragmentation means is that audiences are getting more selective about being where they want to be. In the case of sports, I think is a very illuminating example. We, as an online sports media publisher, we knew that there was very little place for us to be just another generalist publisher. So our strategy was to not create one website, but now 305 different websites. Our company's name is SB Nation, but if you're a Cubs fan, for instance, you know us as Bleed Cubby Blue, and if you're a Redskins fan, you know us as Hot Taven. So we literally went to the length and the extent of building a separate website with a separate URL, with a separate brand name, with a separate writer, the whole separate community for each one of those websites, with the theory being, no one self-identifies as a sports fan, more or less. They self-identify as a team fan. And as such, if we're going to program in this fragmented environment and be a publishing company in this fragmented environment, we have to really do that. Now, as a business, we have to get scale and efficiency off of that. So we built a back-end technology to power all of that. We built a front end that is consistent across those 305 sites from a UI perspective, so that advertisers could have a turnkey solution, so that we can kind of have one implementation of add this as opposed to 305 implementations, and so that we can kind of leverage data across the network to help ourselves and get those network effects. But to the consumer, they just know I'm a Cubs fan and I'm here with a whole bunch of other Cubs fans, and that's really all I care about. And I would argue that increasingly media is that way. If I kind of walked up to you and it said hey, do you like TV? You'd be like, I don't understand what you're talking about. I like shows that I like, whether it's American Idol or Mad Men, but I'm not a TV fan per se. And I can go on and on, walk up to you at a party and say, hey, do you dig music? You'd be like, that's kind of weird. But we all like the artists or the bands that we care about, and et cetera. So I think media is heading toward, that fragmentation just grows and grows and grows, and you have to plug into kind of the various discovery and directed behaviors, whether it's search, social, et cetera, to be relevant in that universe. So trend number one, fragmentation. Trend number two, obvious to everyone in this room, is around social. In our case, it's not just plugging into the bigger platforms that enable sharing, but we actually have built our own platform too to enable Cubs fans, for instance, to really have a rich experience around what their topic. So I often give the example, if I am I'm not a Cubs fan, but since I'm using that example, like, you know, on your Facebook feed or on your Twitter feed, if you're a Cubs fan and you keep on putting out Cubs stuff, you're going to lose followers, and your Facebook friends, you know, which are probably a bit, you know, we all have whatever between, I don't know what the average is.
It's
but let's-
300 now.
Yeah, so it's like 300 friends. Of those friends, generously, even if I live in Chicago and grew up with all Chicago people, like generously 30% of them are going to care about baseball or care about the Chicago Cubs. And so for everyone else, it's spam. And not only is it spam for them, but for me, it's a less relevant experience, because if I really want to talk about what the shortstop did last night and that coaching decision, I can't engage in that conversation. It's not contextual enough. So while we believe in plugging into larger platforms, we also believe that there's a place for contextualized conversations, you know, around professional grade content. And so that's why, you know, the old board community is still as relevant as ever for us. And so we're really investing in that, whether it's around sports or technology or ultimately other categories. And then the third and final one, and then I'll shut up for a second, is around real time. And again, you know, I'm speaking to a sophisticated audience, but for us as a publisher, it's just incredible to see the pace of news. You know, when I was starting out in the media business, as I mentioned, I worked at CNN for a little while, and you know, everything was driven by the daily news cycle. And it was kind of a relic of an era where we woke up and we got the paper, and the newspaper set the agenda, and then maybe at the end of the day, there was the 6 o'clock news with Dan Rather or whatever, and that would kind of cap the day's events, and then the next day you'd start up again. And now, you know, fast forward, there is no news cycle, there's just trends and trending topics. And as a modern day media organization, if you're going to be relevant, you have to be in the trending topic business, you know, and kind of feed that beast. And that, you know, requires special technology and a special editorial know-how and workflow to really do effectively, particularly when you're doing it across all these fragmented topics that I just spoke of. So, you know, those three things, fragmentation, social, and real time, are really how I define kind of the modern media company and modern publisher.
And then when you look at something like real time and getting into trending topics, I mean, just by way of example, how would you even begin to do that? I mean, so you're a site, you have guys that are sitting there. What I mean, how do they do that in any sort of scalable way? I mean,
so that's where technology comes into place. And you know, reason I'm bullish on my company, and we're not the only one, but you know, like we face a very bunch of daunting competitors, and I think the key is to use technology to facilitate that. You need talent as well, of course, but you know, technology without talent, you wind up getting sites like, you know, I don't want to like name names, but like there's content farms, right? So like technology without talent is like SEO spam or Twitter spam or whatever, and we all know companies that do that. And we don't, personally, you know, actually not a bad idea, you know, Demand went public and they do some of that, and I know they're working to improve that, but that's not who we aspire to be. On the other end of the spectrum, you have talent without technology, and that's where I would classify a lot of the kind of traditional media companies that are dictated by, you know, and I'll speak freely just because I have friends over there, but say like the Washington Post. I know and they're doing some interesting things, and they're investing a lot in technology, but I know ultimately one of the big cultural issues that they have, just to pick on them for a second, is that they have these outstanding newspaper writers who are literally like the best newspaper writers to ever walk the planet. You know, they've won Pulitzer Prizes, whatever, and they can't like take that person and be like, dude, media landscape's changed. It's all about like real time and blah blah blah. You got to get on Twitter and do this. Like they're actually doing that, but it's not taking. That's not who these people are. That's not what their skill set is. Yet they're extraordinarily genius newspaper people, and it just you know. One of the things I always preach is like this is a distinct medium. Just like you wouldn't think to necessarily expect a newspaper person to go on television and be successful. It happens, but it's like 5% of the time. And you don't take a radio person, you know, Howard Stern isn't, you know, his TV show wasn't a big hit for a reason. He's awesome at radio, he's not awesome at TV. same thing for online. So, to answer your question one way, we hire people who are native to this craft. And, people who are not, I think that's just continuously underestimated. And I think some of the media companies are catching on to it, and I think more people are as younger and native to this craft, so there are more folks to choose from. But it's incredible how there's still a thought that you can just take someone who's good at one thing and put them online. So one thing is we hire people who are native to the craft, and then as I was saying, we support them with technology. We built a whole digital newsroom that is distributed, virtual, enables collaboration on stories, ideas, enables distributed assignment, enables analytics that both pre and post, and for that matter real time, to determine what story ideas, to help the, it doesn't kind of tell you what to write obviously, but it does inform you about the demand around what you are going to write. So at least you kind of have that information going into it. Gives you the information in real time once you actually do it, and then, and by the way, we had dinner, and I think you guys will be a big help in that regard. But then it gives you kind of the post, the post-publish information too, and which could ultimately help you on the next thing, or even if you catch it in time, help you tweak on the fly as well. And so, it's a combination of technology and talent that really kind of enable this real-time publishing environment.
So when you guys are looking at like data challenges in terms of how you guys are going to use analytics, I mean, there's one set of analytics that will tell you how your site, how the things are performing. There's a whole set of tools that you can use to optimize each story and the distribution you mentioned. There's all these channels that you guys have to be a part of, and then there's, I guess, another discrete set that tells you what's hot, right? If you were to value those, I mean, do you guys think you would be better investing all your stuff in knowing what's hot first? Is it better to optimize better? I mean, do you guys have those kind of discussions on where to, because you can invest in any of those things, right?
Yeah, we do. I kind of look at it, and it's still evolving. We haven't cracked the code, but, generally speaking, we've had times where we have swung too far to one of those things, or too far the other way. What I found is, there was a time where we weren't data-driven enough, and we kind of learned the hard way that you just, you're leaving traffic and opportunity on the table. And in a creative organization, particularly in like an editorially creative organization, you're going to have folks with great ideas, and there's going to be some amount of cultural pushback on, let's say, like when you choose to reflect the agenda by looking at, say, trending topic data or search data or even social data, like, all those things will kind of tell you what's going on now. And so a lot of media companies, modern media companies, get themselves into trouble when they're just like adding to that echo chamber, And so we have a rule for ourselves that, like, you can't do that. Like, we don't do, I saw the other day Huffington Post, how to either fire someone or put someone on hiatus because, like, they literally just, like, regurgitated a whole article from someone else. And that's because they probably saw it trending and they just kind of wrote it up, and they were kind of in the business of doing that. Like, so we don't do that. Like, we have a rule. We might advance the agenda on something, so if we see something that is trending or blowing up, we're going to write about it for sure, because the data is going to guide us in that direction. But we at least set a rule for ourselves that we're not going to just repeat it. We're going to advance the agenda by researching and adding some information or opinion that moves the story forward. So there's part that, and then there's part setting the agenda, which is a harder thing to do, and it's more ultimately, I don't know precisely the ROI, but we learned the hard way that if you just do the former, you can't distinguish yourself as a brand ultimately, and that has impact. We're in the brand advertising business. We, moreover, like, we have a bunch of strong people who are good at it, and we're finding more and more that while you need the kind of call it the advancing agenda, data-driven stuff, it's the completely original stuff that makes you a brand and actually makes you relevant. The other stuff is becoming harder and harder to differentiate. And they're more, since there are a lot of kind of technology-based advancements that help you with the other stuff, everyone ultimately has access to the data, and people can get little edges here and there, but those edges tend to be fleeting until everyone else catches up. So ultimately, you have talented people who are informed by the data but not a slave to it. I think that's where you make your mark.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of, on the other side of data, you mentioned that you guys were in the brand advertising business. So you talked a little bit about how you guys are making money and how you see, and we talked about this on the panel we were on a little bit, how you see direct sales versus some of the stuff that's going on in RTB affecting your business.
Yeah. So we make our money 85, it depends on the month, but roughly 85–90% of it on direct sale brand advertisement, CPM-based advertisement, selling to large brands, advertisers that are looking to connect with predominantly male audiences, that are into sports. So those of you who watch sports on TV or whatever, it's really the same advertising base. It's automotive. It's actually a lot of technology advertisers like telecom and gadgets, which is part of what drove us to get into the gadget publishing business too. But what they're buying from us is exposure and engagement with their brands. And I think as an innovator in the market, but still like a new guy, and still frankly quite smaller than the market leaders, ESPN, Yahoo Sports. We had to distinguish ourselves by not only the composition of our audience, but how we deliver the message. So the composition of our audience, by definition, it's it's a new media site. It's a little younger, a little hipper, a little edgier. I think brand marketers like that, so they kind of like our audience composition, even if we're not the biggest. But what they really like is then how we can deliver the message. And because our sites, are very kind of blog-centric, what that means is there's an individual accountable for every site. And that person, almost in a way that a radio DJ or radio talk show host would kind of be able to do a live read of a brand advertisement, with full disclosure and full transparency, our guys can do that too. I mean, they can kind of say, hey, I'm running this site, and so-and-so is one of our advertisers, and here's what they are advertising, and frankly, not in a salesy way, but in an authentic way, be able to say, hey, here's how I'm making money. These guys are supporting our sites and our communities, and listen to what they say. And as such, we're experiencing performance for those advertisers. Frankly, even when the bloggers don't do that, even when we just put up the media, there's kind of a built-in understanding that these advertisers are supporting our community, and these advertisers are kind of understand us. And what that translates into is just higher click-through, and in most cases, when there is a conversion to be had, we see good conversions, although we're not, we're at the top of the funnel, so we're usually not in the conversion game. But the metrics that we're judged on are generally either click-through or some sort of other engagement. Maybe it's voting on a poll, or maybe it's liking something or signing up for a Facebook page thing or whatever it is. But we've been able to prove and get renewals based on the fact that we can drive that engagement.
So you mentioned Facebook, and also my last question, I think, so we can let everyone go. What's your, as a pretty large publisher and as someone who's had a lot of experience in publishing, what's your take on the future of Facebook? And we just saw Google Plus come out. I mean, do you have any early opinions, any calls on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think I haven't got enough utility out of Google Plus yet to be able to say that we don't it's a phenomenon. Saw they released 10 million sign up today. You can kind of go to their leaderboard and see, though, it's based on who the top people are. It's still when Mark Zuckerberg and I think the product manager for Bradley Horowitz is number 18. That it's still an early adopter crowd. But I think there's a lot of relevance, just you know, speaking as a consumer and someone who's managed a lot of internet products, I can see the relevance of that product. There's a lot of unfulfilled needs from Facebook and Twitter, but you know, Google has failed on several occasions trying to do it. So I don't know. This is probably obvious. I think this one has a better shot than any of them have. You know, I think Twitter, you know, if anyone's going to be more vulnerable, it might be Twitter than Facebook in this scenario. But I also don't think Twitter's like running scared or should, you know, anytime soon. And you know, I just haven't yet, even though I signed up for it and I kind of used it as a test, for me and for a lot of the people I know, like maybe with Kevin Rose being an exception, like it, you know, the utility just hasn't hit me in the face yet. Like I appreciate it on an abstract level, and I can, you know, appreciate it as someone who's in the industry and kind of seeing the momentum, and so I'm taking it very seriously. And we're gonna embrace it as a company because it has enough critical mass and momentum, and there are enough people like us, then it's a self-fulfilling thing. But like out of the gate, it's not like, you know, my answer wouldn't be like, holy shit, this is it. It would be like, this is something that's serious. Unlike, you know, if you had asked me about Buzz, I would have said I don't get it. I did say that. You know, ask me about this, I'd say like, yeah, this one has a shot for sure.
And do you think Facebook should be worried about that, or what do you think of Facebook generally? I mean, is it just kind of an inevitability for the next 5 years we all have to deal with Facebook?
I think so. You know, I was in our, we use like a 37 Signals campfire chat room at work, like an IRC thing. And I like to hang out in the developers room and just like kind of lurk there, and like, because that's where I learn everything. And they were joking around today. It's like Facebook is the new IE in terms of like having to deal with their crap when you're developing, but you know, they are powerful. And I will say, as a partner, we've had a great experience with them. Like they're getting much better in terms of partner relations and that kind of thing. Like they kind of make an effort. They're no longer like faceless, and you know, there are engineers on the other side that you can kind of reach out to, and they'll help you. And so like, you know, I kind of have good things to say about them on that level. Like they're making, I think Cheryl's influence, they're like just making a much better effort in terms of reaching out to publishers and partners. But on the platform side, just like from a technology perspective, it's really difficult, and you know, things change, and you know, you're kind of at their mercy, and the whole, what was the Fred Wilson line, don't be anyone's bitch kind of thing. Like you can definitely, you know, you definitely feel that way at times, and so there are things they need to do to, from a platform perspective, to enhance that in a big way if they're gonna kind of be that platform company that they're leading today.
Right, I've done enough damage here.
Charlie, you're the first. Surprise.
Yeah, I'm usually shy. But so we're doing a personalization API where if you use Addis, you can tell you everything you know about the user, their interests, and what services they use. What do you see as the future of personalized content within professional blogging?
You know, I don't know what I see as the future. You know, it's like we just go back and forth on this so much. Like there have been so many like failed attempts at personalization, and you know, I've always viewed any personalization algorithm personally, and I want to see yours, but like I always viewed it as like a 10 to 15% solution, meaning it is really relevant for 10 to 15% of my consumption experience. So like I'll click on the personalized thing 10 to 15% of the time. Or another way to look at it is like 10 to 15% of the population prefer to navigate via a personalized experience. And back in the day, that, you know, my Yahoo or iGoogle or whatever, you know, like there's, or an RSS reader, you know, like there's people who want that. Like increasingly, I think the lines between personalization and social are becoming blurred. I mean, just looking at, you know, I think a lot of our behavior, but, you know, certainly mine is like I kind of went from RSS being my kind of personalization mechanic to my Twitter feed being that. And so like is, you know, but the nice thing about Twitter is it enables like that kind of social serendipity and also kind of the ability to kind of be aware of an event that may not be part of my click pattern or part of my behavioral pattern or part of my stated preference pattern. You know, social injects that, you know, while still giving me kind of a curated personal experience. And so, short answer would be like, you know, I believe in personalization, but not in the kind of purely, you know, I don't think it can be purely based on behavioral data. I don't think it can be purely based on stated preferences. It probably can't be purely based on what my friends are serving up. It has to be like a really good balance of those things.
And you see that being more as something that's, I suppose, of the features of the user, more overtly, or something more that the publisher can employ, maybe transparently, or, you know, to make the content more relevant?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think passive is better than active if you, you know, if you can do passive well. It's just so, you know, it's just been such a holy grail for so long that I like, you know, I'm a little bit cynical, but you know, the end objective is right on, and so I just like, you know, seeing how you get there, and you know, I don't want to be too cynical. I mean, we've come a long way, and like, I think content experiences are more relevant than ever, and you know, advertising is probably more relevant than it ever has been, but it's still got a long way to go.
Anyone else got questions?
How many of those team-specific sites do you guys have?
So we have 305 different websites. Go to sbnation.com/blogs and you can see them all. But
So that's all baseball.
we've got
football,
every pro
hockey,
team in
basketball.
North America, and increasingly, you know, we have increasingly like European soccer, even increasingly some Latin American soccer as well, and college.
What effort's required to spin those up? Like how much staff is devoted to each one? Or how many freelance writers?
So at the lowest level, you can just have, you know, one person running. You know, there are some of our smaller sites, like, you know, like some of our maybe like small market hockey sites might have like one person. But generally, what happens is, you know, we hire and we pay, you know, we pay all our writers, and we'll pay one person to run the site. And then, but those people in turn will find people within their community who assist them, and they may in turn pay some of those people, or we might ultimately pay some of those people. And then they also just might have some volunteers to help them kind of moderate the communities as well. So, you know, now on the high end, we also have some sites that are not team sites, like our flagship site, sbnation.com. is kind of a more traditional newsroom where we actually employ, you know, I don't know, maybe upwards of like a dozen or 15 like full-time writers on that site, and that's a little bit more of a traditional model. And then for our technology site, which is, we currently have a WordPress blog running. We're going to launch it in earnest in the fall, but right now we have a temporary site. It's really easy to check it out if you have. It's called thisismynext.com, and that's also more of a traditional model where we've hired already about a dozen writers, and they're, you know, out there just contributing.
Mono.
Recently, AOL experimented with something called Seed.com, where the editor stuff actually rates content submitted by users and then, you know, reward them back. So what do you think of that model as opposed to like a pure editorially generated site like?
Let me just repeat the question. So the question was, in short, what does Jim think of AOL Seed?
Yeah, so you know what, there's certain, like, I admire the idea conceptually, but in practice, I don't think it really works very well. And a few reasons for it. Like, first of all, you know, and maybe not for obvious reasons. The obvious reasons would be like quality control, which I think has been an issue for Demand and for Seed. You know, we have a competitor in sports called Bleacher Report, and they're kind of that same model where they don't pay their people though, like, so they tend to get even, you know, lower quality standards. But you know, the problem with that model, aside from quality control, is like it's harder to build up subject matter experts in communities. And our model is kind of antithetical to that, in that like we go out and for our Cub site, like anyone can contribute. You know, there's a user-generated element and it's democratic and all that. But for our main writers, the people who lead the site, we select people who have a body of work, you know, have been writing on the topic for at least 2 years and doing it day in, day out, 365 days a year. Even, you know, imagine, the Cubs are one thing, but imagine like writing about an MLS soccer team during the off season every single day, or even like Georgetown, which is a basketball school, writing about them, you know, during the summer when nothing's going on. Like, we have people who like do that all day long. You know, you have to be really good at what you're doing to do that. But more importantly, when you do that, you create community around it. And so the problem with, like, say, the Seed model, in my opinion, is that you know, you're getting freelancers, and let's say you get over the quality hump, which is a very difficult thing to do. The bigger problem becomes like there's no connection between the writer and the audience, and therefore it's hard to create a media property based on that. You look at the history of any media company, or any good media property, whether it's on TV or in the newspaper or a magazine, it's based upon like the franchise that you create and the rapport you create with your audience. So if I'm anyone from, say, Maureen Dowd, I have an audience of people. I'm not, you know, if that changes every week and it's a random person, or if I'm Rush Limbaugh, to pick someone on the other end of the political spectrum, they've built an audience and an affinity based on the fact that they're a human being with opinions and a character that that helps grow an audience. When you have a system of nameless, faceless, $5 an article freelancers, you can't build that up. And it's particularly important in online because whereas you know, a newspaper has a community of readers, you never really see that community of readers. Online, you see it, and it's part of the product.
So I'm not a big Cubs fan, so I'm going to change to Dallas. So if Cowboys and Mavs and other sort of sports franchises, are those, you said they're probably independent site blogs, correct? How do you weave in sort of the collective local market and have editorial staff share and maybe cross-populate or rethink how content is distributed amongst sort of eyeballs that might be focused on the Dallas market or the franchises associated with Dallas? That's my first question.
Yeah, well, we have some great Dallas sites, and our Cowboy site is really awesome. So encourage you to check it out. And you know, so I call them independent, but the truth is we do own all the brands and operate all the brands. So we're not like an ad network. You know, we're a first-party publisher, and as such, we are able to help, you know, create some cross circulation. We're very careful about how we do it though, because, you know, a good example, like here in Washington, or you pick any city, like just because you're a fan of one team doesn't mean you're a fan of the others. And like our whole thing is, if you're a Redskins fan, for instance, like you might not want to see a whole lot of national stuff in your content. In fact, you're probably, you know, you're probably coming to our Redskins site as opposed to, say, WashingtonPost.com because you want a pure Redskins experience. But, you know, there are ways to do it. Data and personalization kind of is one way to do it, by the way, and so like we are, you know, doing a little bit more of that. one of the things we did in the case of Dallas, for instance, we launched an SB Nation Dallas site that kind of takes the best of our Cowboys content, our Texas Rangers content, even our SMU content, and puts it all in one place, but goes a step further and kind of creates content that is a little more accessible to a broader audience. Our sites, we think about who goes to a Dallas Cowboys site. It's generally a reasonably sophisticated Dallas Cowboys fan, right?
I would say that's true.
Yeah, there are a few of those out there, and the ones that are sophisticated, they'll come to our site because it could be kind of intimidating for like a casual fan. Like if you can't name the backup, offensive lineman, like you might not be comfortable commenting on one of our blogs, even though it's perfectly fine to read one. And you know what? As a busy person myself who actually runs a sports company, I'll confess, I don't have enough time to catch up on stuff, and so doesn't mean I'm any less of a sports fan. Or I think there are a lot of people who grew up as sports fans, but then they kind of got busy with work and family and social life, and so they would they might care about how their team is doing, but that doesn't mean they have time to watch all the games and everything. So we created a more accessible product for them in these city sites, and we now have 21 of those sites like SB Nation Dallas that help to cross-promote one another.
Yeah, it'd be really cool to know that if I landed on, I'm a big Mavs fan, I go to the Mavs blog, you knew also that I was a Cowboys fan, right? To direct my eyeball to a Cowboys direction.
The other way we do it too is we have our own kind of user profiles too, where you can kind of sign up for different communities, and then we can give you information based on what's going on. But you're right, that's where kind of personalization does help a bunch as well.
And you mentioned SMU, and I wanted college sports to me. In my opinion, I think there's more loyalty and more allegiance and following. I think really intently in the college arena than I think in professional sports.
Absolutely.
Where do you guys see the movement in how you approach maybe segmentation?
I agree. So we have pretty much a site for every major Division I school, I think there is certainly more engagement, defined by time spent with the sport or passion index. They tend to be smaller audiences, but more engaged audiences, and we focus very heavily on them. I went to Emory University in Atlanta, which doesn't have any sports teams except for swimming, I think, so I didn't really have an appreciation for the pageantry and kind of passion of college sports, but really until I took this job. I would watch big college games, and I kind of had a superficial understanding, but running this company really has opened my eyes to just how incredible it is, how emotional it is for so many people.
Anyone else? Last question?
Do you think that this sort of hyper-segmentation strategy translates to other arenas outside sports? How are you handling technology with that?
Absolutely. I mean, more than I've talked a lot about sports, and for us, just as a history, I think sports was almost a proving ground to see if these principles could apply, and they have, and that's what has given us the confidence to get into our next vertical, and will likely guide us into other verticals. And so, I struggle to think of any categories where the same lessons don't apply. Let's use technology just as a parallel. In sports, you have fans. In technology, you have fanboys. In sports, even a lot of what we do too is it's not just around content and community. One level is content, one level is community around those topics, the fans. And then the next level is also structured data. And sports has a lot of statistical structured data. You have teams, you have players, you have individual stats for those players. And not to carry the analogy too far, but in technology you have manufacturers, you have devices, and you have specifications. So it's they're all, and just for us as technologists, it's really, there's so many things that are comparable that enables us to it's going to the incremental cost to having like a really sophisticated user